Welcome to the Don't Go There podcast. I'm Dr. Brenda Gazelle, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Samantha Seaton, Amanda Krotzer, and Jennifer Sasaki. We are four psychotherapists going toward mental health issues that aren't often discussed. And our podcast may go to psychological places that are both scary and exciting. We hope to inspire authenticity and vulnerability. We want to go there, and we're so happy you've decided to go there with us. Hi there. Okay, so today we're talking about forgiveness. In fact, the title for this episode is What the Hell is Forgiveness?
I love it.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of confusion there. This is Brenda, and I'm with Amanda and Sam. Jen won't be joining us today, but we'll see her next time. So just wanted to throw that out there. When we talk about forgiveness, we were having a pre-discussion about it and just noticing that so much religion and moral philosophy join in, and that we all have a very particular way of understanding forgiveness, and we're raised in a way that forgiveness was either a moral code to forgive or not to forgive. And so I think that's a great place to start, because when you're asking the question, what is forgiveness and is it necessary and what does it mean, especially as psychotherapists? You're asking, is it right? Is it wrong? What is it? And I think that most people, they feel like they're supposed to forgive. There's this just implicit rule that if you're healthy, you're going to be forgiving. And then if you grow up religious, especially in the Christian subculture like myself, and I know Amanda, it's forgive 70 times 7, forgive, turn the other cheek. And I was raised, that is a moral must. And so what happens then is that it's not you really learning this idea of maybe authentic forgiveness, but more of a false forgiveness. And so I'd love for us each to talk a little bit about, just to begin this podcast, how we grew up, what we were taught about what forgiveness is. Who would like to start?
Go ahead. Yeah, you mentioned we grew up much the same. I grew up in a very legalistic Christian home where my parents taught out of denying themselves in order to forgive and to make peace. And that's what happiness was and joy came from. And so I remember growing up, and it didn't matter what happened to me. If I ran to my parents and told them about a disservice or a pain that I had inflicted by somebody else, it was always, well, the Lord tells us, forgive 70 times 7. So, kill him with kindness and
yes.
And don't let it affect you. Put a smile on and move on. And I remember hating forgiveness as a kid. It evoked so much anger in me to forgive the way that I was taught to do it. I was very confused by it because I felt like something was missing for me, to later come and find out that it was a lack of my parents observing my feelings and my indiscretions and how I was treated in the situation in order to make peace and to keep everyone happy. And so that's how I learned forgiveness. It was a must. There was no question. And you were to deny yourself being understood to forgive.
Yeah, it's so great that you just started with that, because I knew this somewhere when we were going to talk about this subject, but I don't think that it dawned on me till right this moment that, yes, because forgiveness was such a must, that forgiveness became traumatic for me. That forgiveness growing up matched trauma. And it wouldn't just be, say, at school, someone hurt my feelings, that then I would have to go home and say, oh, my feelings are hurt. And they said, go forgive, turn the other cheek. And I would go back and then be hurt again repeatedly. But it also happened in my household where, say, my father, I had remarried, and so I had a stepmom, and I remember the first few years of her, she was quite histrionic and abusive, and she would say horrific, abusive things to me, and I would tell my father, and he would confront her, and then she would go into kind of a rage and end up in her bedroom crying, and then he would say, you need to forgive her. And you need to apologize that she's so sad, but we're not going to feel, we're rising above this, right? Go be kind and forgive. And all of your feelings get lost.
There's no room for them.
There's no room for them. And so I became, that was when I started developing this amazing gift of, I'm just going to go and say sorry to my abuser and ask for and forgive them too. I also know I was forgiving them. So I did feel more powerful in some way.
Yeah.
But a trauma began happening to my very core of myself, which meant my experience when it comes to being abused or being hurt by another doesn't matter. So when you say deny yourself, and then I kept thinking of the Christian idea of deny yourself and follow me, right? And I'm thinking, of course, that's knowing Jesus, and that's not knowing Jesus.
Right.
But as a child, all you can think of is, I'm being good, and I guess Jesus loves me for denying who I am and that I don't matter and that I was abused doesn't matter. And then you grow up feeling like you don't matter. And this I think is very common, and not just in Christian subculture, but of course ours is very informed by that. So it's interesting that already as we talk about forgiveness and what the hell it is, I start from a place of saying, if it's not done correctly, it can be very traumatic.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was in the car with my kids the other day, and I'll share about what forgiveness has been like in my life as well. But I was in the car with my kids, and my kids are 11 and 12. And I thought, for the sake of doing a little research on forgiveness, I would ask them, is forgiveness like always the answer to something? Is forgiveness like a good thing? And both unanimously, like I could barely get the question out before. And I told them it was for the podcast and could I share their answers? And they were like, oh yeah. I think they were like excited. And they were both like, oh no, it's not always the answer. No, like it's the thing that grown-ups want you to do because they don't like when you're mad at each other. That was like their language. Or they like grown-ups want you to forgive each other because they don't like it when people are angry with each other. They don't like it when we're upset. They don't like it when we're fighting.
And remind the audience, our listeners, how old your kids are, by the way.
11 and 12.
Yeah.
So they, and even me, fights between them, they were very clear. And I asked them, like, so you feel like grown-ups push you to forgive before you're done being angry, before you're done, like, expressing what just happened to you. And they were like, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So it was a nice reflection back to me as a mother, not to fast forward their upset with each other because it's uncomfortable for me, because it is uncomfortable and hard. But it also was a really interesting window into their world that my boys were kind of having to put themselves, it felt like in an uncomfortable cookie cutter of what it meant to be a good human. So I stuff my anger, I stuff my feelings, I stuff the hurt and injustice, and I jump to forgiveness.
And you know what, right when you say that, I think it's so important, though, to acknowledge the difference between stuffing and suppression, right? So in psychological language, there's two defense mechanisms, one we call repression and one we call suppression. And suppression is actually a healthy defense mechanism, which is we often censor ourselves. So we realize this isn't really helpful and I don't need to say F you right now. Instead, I could say I feel very angry with you. And that's a nice suppression, right? It's good, but we're still expressing ourselves. We're just suppressing that which we know, isn't effective or helpful.
It's like emotional maturity.
Yeah, sure. If you will. There you go. And the more you do that, yes. And then repression is the stuffing.
Yeah.
And I think people get so confused on that. But repression is, I'm still totally angry.
Yeah.
And I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard here. I don't feel like you're knowing that, in thinking of your sons that, he, I don't know, took my Xbox turn before it was time or
something happened.
Yeah. And it was uncool, man.
Yeah.
And I'm still upset about it. And that adds on to all the other times he hasn't been noticing me. And no, I'm mad about all of this. And what you're saying, which I've done with kids, everyone, if we went to school, it's hug and make up and let it go, right? Push it down. And that's repression. And it's always unhealthy.
Yeah.
And research shows it.
Yeah.
It never is healthy. So we often think we're suppressing and we're being good by rising above or pushing something down and we feel proud of ourselves. But when you feel proud of yourself for pushing away your anger or pushing away your pain, know that you will pay the bill. eventually. And it is never going to be okay. You have to acknowledge those feelings. They come back and they bite you. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. But I want to hear a little more about your growing up with forgiveness, but I had to throw out that.
Yeah, totally. Since we've been talking about this, I don't think the word was ever used growing up. I grew up in a family with a lot of verbal violence, I think is a good way to describe what it was like for me anyway. And the act of forgiveness was shown a lot when we just kind of didn't hold people accountable. But the mention of the word forgiveness, I don't believe I ever remember. It wasn't until later in life. So I was looking up the Wikipedia definition and it said that forgiveness is not condoning the behavior. And I feel like there was a lot of condoning of horrible behavior in my home in the name of forgiveness. So that kind of like what you were talking about, Amanda, where there's this sacrifice of the self, almost this like martyrdom. If I sacrifice myself and martyr myself, then I'm superior.
Yes.
But in doing so in a very like unthought through way, there was a lot of condoning of unforgivable behavior. And so I didn't grow up with a concept. I was not a Christian home that I grew up in. I wasn't pushed necessarily to forgive. I was kind of pushed to justify and condone in a lot of ways. And I think it was more done because it was too scary to hold someone accountable because that meant the whole system had to change. And so I think it was a lot of fear avoidance that ended up being very unconscious, like condoning and maybe look like forgiveness. And then as I got older, I remember watching a documentary. I was in therapy and I remember watching this documentary called Forgiving Dr. Mengele, who is this doctor from the Holocaust from World War II. And he worked for Hitler. And apparently he did some atrocities in the study of, I think, genetics in like Aryans versus Jewish people, really horrible human scientific work. And there was this group of people that had chosen to forgive him and to forgive all the people that worked for him. And they, I think, took action steps towards it, found some of these people, however many years later. Wow. And, read them letters of forgiveness, offered them forgiveness. A really powerful documentary. I mean, you see people break down because I think in the receiving of that forgiveness, it allowed people the freedom to own their guilt. And so it was really powerfully done. But I remember walking into my therapist's office the next day and being like, I have the answer. I have the answer. I can just forgive all of these atrocities and it's all going to be okay. And she very lovingly, she must have, I look back as a therapist now and I think she must have felt tremendous compassion for me. I think she must have looked at me and known in that moment it was too painful to think about the reality of what I had been through.
Yes.
So I had to fast forward it and jump to forgiveness because forgiveness feels good. And it feels like it's all going to be okay. It felt reassuring. And so she very lovingly reminded me that I could be wherever I was. And the fact that I was in therapy, in the process, looking at the truth of my experience in my life, that was an act of forgiveness.
Yeah. And
so I think giving me that way to hold it, that it was a process, that I got to take my time. And then the fact that I was even doing the work that we were doing was an act of forgiveness. That let me hold both. That let me hold that forgiveness and feeling like I could offer grace helped me feel in line with myself and felt so good. But that I could also hold that there might be times that I cannot offer that grace, but that I'm still a person that I'm proud of.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a very confusing topic. So I'm glad it's called What the Hell is Forgiveness? Because it's evolved in my life to feel like it's just a process. But then I'm not going to lie. There are some days that I really enjoy getting to be angry because it feels so strong. And
because you're talking about what authentic forgiveness is. I mean, so you're saying for a moment I said, oh gosh, that's out there, authentic forgiveness. Because I think that documentary, what I'm hearing, I didn't see it, but is that you saw what authentic forgiveness can look like. And there is freedom in that, right? And you went, oh, that's what I need. And you just wanted to fast forward there.
Yeah.
And that's what we all want to do.
Yeah.
We want to fast forward there. Yes. Yeah. But really, if we look at it, that's exactly it, is that authentic forgiveness means grieving and entering back into a relationship with that person that we've cut off quite often. And we don't want to. We want to, make them usually all bad. But sometimes they can be all good, but want to split it off.
But do you think we always, and I really don't know the answer to this, like what you just said, do you think we always have to enter back into relationship?
Internally, not externally.
Okay.
Never.
I'm glad that you clarified that.
Yes. No, exactly right.
Because I think sometimes entering back in is, I think what a lot of people think they have to do. Like, I forgive, and then we can have connection. But I think sometimes forgiveness is a realization that you can't have connection, but you can forgive.
No, thank you. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's sadly, it's internal, that internal relationships open back up. But no, I think that, quite often we cannot get back into relationship. And that makes me think of, when I was working with, at a Christian shelter with domestic violence victims. And, so many of them would quote scripture for going back to their abuser who was physically, emotionally, and verbally abusing them and sexually abusing them. And they would say, well, forgive 70 times 7, turn the other cheek. I'm like, whoa, you've taken this to that, again, really traumatic place. That's not about loving yourself. And I remember I would quote quite often the first commandment, that's not the first commandment, but love your neighbor as yourself. Is that number 1? No, that's like on one of them, but nonetheless, who cares right now? Point is, love your neighbor as yourself is one of the 10 commandments. I know this. Yeah. And I said, gosh, you guys, there's an assumption there. Yes. There's an assumption you love yourself. There's an assumption that you care for who you are. If you treat yourself like you would, as you're doing now, that wouldn't be really love. And so we've got to assume that God wants us to love ourselves. And that was just so profound to them. It was like, no, I'm supposed to be nothing and just let him hit me. I mean, that's how far they took forgiveness. And I need to keep entering back into relationship if I'm a good woman. And then people at their church told them to go back and forgive. Yeah. Right? And it's like, whoa, we gotta look at this and say, no, re-entering is not forgiveness.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned that, because thinking back in my own journey, I feel like because of the way I was taught to forgive, I lacked a sense of self.
Yes.
So as the anger built, because things kept getting pushed down and there was no resolution, I wasn't being heard, I wasn't being seen, I wasn't being validated in how I was feeling, that I went to the opposite side and basically said, fuck you to everyone. No one's getting my forgiveness. And if you wrong me because I didn't know who I was and what I wanted and how forgiveness fit into my life, if you wrong me, you're out. You're cut off. It left me without a lot of relationships. But it felt good and it felt safe because I, for once, was validating how I felt.
And stood up for yourself.
You're right.
You said, I matter.
Right.
Yeah, which is a truth. And a truth that God wants you to know and feel. So in some ways, you were finally grasping, that, oh, wow, I matter and I'm valuable and God loves me by forsaking forgiveness. Right? I've had the same process, so I get it. But then you lose the other piece, which is what is real forgiveness. But I think, gosh, I was like, that's it. So really, until we have a strong sense of self, can we authentically forgive is a great question.
Well, and how do you combine the two? So I don't want to lose all parts of what my parents taught me. In my faith and what I believe and how I've read about God's love and his forgiveness. But at the same time, I don't want to live in this victim position. Where I'm not getting, I don't want to say a sense of justice, but I'm allowing it to continue to happen in order to follow Christ and be like Christ. Yeah.
I like the definition of things. I like the etymology of words and the definitions of things. So I was looking at the Wikipedia definition, like I mentioned earlier, and it, can I read it?
Of course.
Is that a thing?
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if there was
Is that a thing?
No reading Wikipedia on podcasts because it's going to get sued. Okay. Forgiveness is the intentional and voluntary process by which a victim undergoes a change in feelings and attitude regarding an offense. Lets go of negative emotions such as vengefulness with an increased ability to wish the offender well. Forgiveness is different from condoning, failing to see the action as wrong and in need of forgiveness, excusing, not holding the offender as responsible for the action, forgetting, removing awareness of the offense from consciousness, pardoning, granted for an acknowledged offense by a representative of society, such as a judge, and reconciliation, a restoration of relationship. So I liked that because it pretty much broke it down as like it's this intentional thing that I have this voluntary change in feeling. And I think what I've tried to do before is if I force the voluntary change in feelings and offer them forgiveness, then maybe it will change them. And the grace that I extend, we'll put grace in quotation marks because I don't know if it's real. The grace that I extend will then elicit a change in them, and then they'll be different and everything's going to be okay. Again, that goes my favorite quote. Everything's going to be okay. And I think what I'm thinking,
and that's the idea, right? That I'm so powerful by repressing my needs, that I matter, my sense of self, that if I say, oh, I can rise above all this and just give you grace, that you'll see how awesome I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then
what a big person I am.
What a great person I am, what a big person I am. And then
you'll be moved by it.
Moved deeply to change.
I'm going to be Jesus in that moment. Like, yeah.
And that is right there the definition of codependence, right? Which I've lived through too, so I get it. But when we talked about the domestic violence victims, they're doing as well. They're thinking they can change them by showing them this.
Right.
Look how great I am. Aren't I worth it? So what you're trying in that moment to do is say, aren't I worth your change? And that is a reenactment that I think so many people live through and have no awareness. So I'm so glad that we're talking about it. And I think we'll need to keep demystifying this process because it is complex. Mm-hmm. But how we reenact this desire to have other people give us our worth instead of already showing up, knowing our worth is intact.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And kind of continuing what I was going to say, which is what's the definition of like that omnipotent fantasy?
Yeah.
Which for people who don't know what that is, it's that fantasy that we create about ourselves in a dysfunctional childhood where we believe we are all powerful, all knowing, and all capable. And it looks so different in so many different forms. My version of omnipotence was that I could be a certain way and it would change people. Mm-hmm. And I think I got hits of like dysfunctional reinforcement that was possible.
Yes.
In some way, these little hits. And so I think for me, being able to offer authentic forgiveness means I have to be willing to see some of the shittiest parts of human nature and people's absolute okayness with them. That some people are not held by the same moral standard I am.
Yes.
Some people enjoy hurting others so they don't have to feel their pain.
Yes.
That there is a dark side to human nature that many people live with and are okay with. And I feel like a part of my, like, I don't use the word horror. A part of the horror of my childhood was that some of the people I loved could be so awful and could sleep at night.
Yeah.
And so I think that was terrifying. Right. So I think I moved away from that and was like, I'll just forgive them. They're just really hurting. But I think for me, the ability to authentically forgive goes hand in hand with the ability to see people in a light of reality.
Yeah.
And that is excruciatingly difficult because I'm still this like little girl that wants everything to be good and people to be good. And I'm safe and I'm trusted. And no matter what they show me, it's okay. There's goodness in there. And I think it's been really, important, and it's taken me years because the pain of seeing people's genuine limitations is devastating for me sometimes.
But Sam, there is goodness. It's just that they're not always going towards only goodness. They're not seeking out goodness and truth. There is goodness and badness. I mean, that's the idea of the humanity thing. I mean, at the end of it, I've thought about this so much, and I keep coming back to forgiveness is, for me, that what I keep thinking is forgiveness is just accepting that other people are human. Mm-hmm. They're not all bad and they're not all good, that they are both.
Yeah.
And that they've got, though, they can right now be really okay with, they can be going towards bad, though. That is real. And I think that when you're in that place of wanting to think I can cancel it out by my goodness, that's where we get lost.
Yeah.
Well, and as I'm hearing you both share, I'm thinking about in my journey, it's been coupled with a lot of grief.
Because it's all grief. You got it.
I have to grieve that the relationship that I was in with a person is not what I thought it was. And in order to protect myself, forgiving may mean not having that anymore.
That's right.
And the removal of that person at times in my life.
Yes, that's all.
And not in a cutoff type of way, but in an acceptance that it's not healthy for me. And
that's right.
It's acceptance, right? And that's those 5 stages of grief.
Absolutely.
Acceptance. Like, we're angry. What is it? Like anger, denial, anger, negotiation, depression, acceptance.
Guilt and bargaining is in there too, but yeah.
What's that? Bargaining?
Guilt and bargaining.
Right.
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah. So that's what is it? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, or like 5 stages of grief. And I think that's everything we're talking about, is finally getting to that point where you accept somebody for really who they are, for the real limitations they have. And like you said, and I mean that in the good parts and the bad parts, they're not all bad. But I have noticed in my own life a tendency to think the bad is always fixable. And I don't know if it is. I think some dysfunction is permanent disability.
Yeah,
in
beautiful.
People. And I think that the belief that, even as a therapist, the belief that I could help people, I think I'm more effective when I'm dealing with reality, when I'm really accepting that people are where they are.
Yes.
So that's been a big journey for me. Big journey. Because even coming into becoming a therapist, it was like, oh, I got this. I'm going to be the best therapist ever. I'm going to help people. And it's been grieving,
your limits,
humanity, and people's, even my own profound disabilities. Like, I keep coming back up against some things, and I'm like, man, it'd be a miracle if this ever moves an inch from where it is. Acceptance. It's that final stage, which means you got to go through all of the anger, the denial, the negotiation, the depression, the loss.
A couple things just about what you're saying, which I want to make sure we table or get back to. Mm-hmm. One is, yes, we talk so much right now, and every time people talk about forgiveness, they're always talking about forgiving the other. And what we find out so often is that in order to forgive the other, we have to forgive ourselves. So that the forgiveness of self is one of the biggest ways in which to forgive others, right? Accept my own humanity. I want to get back to that. But real importantly, I just wanted to point out that Kubler-Ross stages, what is so interesting about that is that was a study about people dying. So what she was doing was people were on their deathbed, and that was helping them accept the stages of grief before they die and expire. And I just love that, because a lot of people aren't aware that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about her stages. And so it may look, and so people have done repeated studies and looked at that and said, it may look different if you are forgiving someone else, if you're forgiving a sexual abuser, if you're forgiving a parent, than dying. But at the same time, everyone keeps coming back to that. And why would they keep coming back to it? Because in so many ways, and I think you said this a second ago, too, Amanda, kind of mentioned it. The death of what that relationship is.
There's a death. Yeah.
That we're so often grieving death. And that's what I think all of us say so often when we have a client come in that, here's all that's going on, this is where I want to get to. Almost like when you said, I watched the documentary and I want to get to forgiveness. You didn't say it that way. You were like, all I need to do is forgive. And then what does the therapist say? We look at the person and we say, let's activate the grieving process. Okay, that's the bummer. Here's the bad news. We've got to just have to grieve and grieve and grieve and cry and mourn and get angry and get upset. And who wants to do that?
Yeah.
Right?
I think our world has so many sophisticated ways to bypass that process.
Yes. And so if we're going to authentically forgive, what we're saying is we're welcoming in all this, and that's what I meant, the internal relationship of all the things I didn't get. All the stuff that I didn't get as a child, everything, especially when it's a parent, and just grieve that they're human and that they could only have given me so much, and that I'm human, and that they may be emotionally disabled, like you said, Sam, and I'm just going to just keep grieving it. And I'll tell you, with my own father, it took me gosh, so many years of grieving. And then I would be like, I remember writing him an email saying, and I forgive you, as if it was like a thing that like was done. And I felt like, and I have arrived at forgiveness. And I remember feeling so proud of that email, like, and I forgive you. And I really felt like I had done such, like, yeah, I've been in therapy for like 6 years. I have grieved this man and I let it go. And then he wrote back, it's good not to be bitter, or something. And I was like, it is good not to be bitter. So whatever, But then, of course, right after that, and screw you, because I forgave you, right? There's this sense of and I didn't. And then there was all of a sudden he like asked, we were going to go meet or I was going to see him for something. And I said, I can't do it. I can't meet up right now. Cause I realized, oh God, that was just a moment. Mm-hmm. I don't feel forgiveness. For a moment, I felt like I'll let you be, not God or the devil. I'll let you be human, but now you're the devil again, or you're God. I don't even know, but you're swinging back and forth and I have no idea how to let you just be a person. And that has been the struggle of my life with, forgiving people, letting them be a person.
Who wants to do that?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes me understand my parents a lot more. It's easier to follow the black and white text of how to do this.
Yeah.
Than to go through this entire process.
Right?
It's exhausting.
Put your head down and follow marching orders. Just tell us to forgive and let it go. Then sit there and and grieve and authentically be. It's so painful. And at times it doesn't feel worth it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Dark nights of the soul and forgiveness, if you've gone through a lot, and I still I get indignant. I can think about my stepmother who, I've on these podcasts already mentioned a few times, who was so abusive to me. And I don't forgive her. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I want to. And, I think that certain people I work with who've been sexually abused or emotionally abused in ways that are so sadistic by the other, I think it's healthy that, to say, I tell them, you don't have to forgive them. I've said it to my clients many times. You don't have to. This is a choice. You don't have to forgive them because they feel as if they're supposed to do something. And it's not authentic forgiveness, which is grieving and letting go. Right. I'm supposed to somehow give them a pass on what they did to me and say that it didn't affect me in the deepest way that it did. And it's not true. And I'm still there saying, I'm not giving you a pass. I gave you a pass. I was supposed to my whole life with my stepmother, that I am still not in a place where I'm like, you know what? You're human. It's cool. I mean, she's human. It's cool. I'm not going to talk to you, but I don't feel, compassion for her humanity and I'm not ready to give it. I know that there is so much more grief that comes with that. And I really don't want to enter that for her right now. I'm indignant to give that much more. It feels like I have to enter back in relationship internally with her and grieve more about her. And I'm exhausted by her.
Right.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. My brain just went in all sorts of directions. Like, I don't know, so many things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about program, like 12-step program, right? We have I think it's step 8, which is,
that's good place to
make amends that, accept where to do so. We make a list of all of the people we have wronged and become willing to make amends to them all. And then the next step, we make amends, except where to do so would injure them or others. And always, personally, I've always been encouraged to put myself at the top of that list as the person that I need to make amends to. And then starting in that direction of like, where have I been wrong, right? So if I've been the offender, if I've been on the other side of forgiveness, I don't always necessarily know if I need it, to be honest, which frees me up on the victim side to feel like I don't have to give it. When I have wronged people, I hope that they give themselves the freedom to never fucking speak to me again. My ex-fiance, may he never feel like he has to talk to me again. That's okay. I think I'm okay with it. And there's something about that feels respectful to me. I've made my amends. I have owned what I felt was my part and my wrong. I think I am still in process of forgiving myself. He may never forgive me, and I don't know if I need it. Honestly, like, would it be nice to have it? I mean, I don't know if it even matters anymore, to be honest. I think I'm in a place where it it doesn't matter. I mean,
You've forgiven yourself. So let's talk about that
I
process.
Have understanding for myself, which is, I think, forgiveness. And so I like what you said, because then tying it into my own recovery work, being on the offender side, I feel like it frees me up to think, I can be a respectful person with dignity and integrity and be in process in forgiving. I don't have to get to this arrival of like, I feel differently about you. Most people would have wronged me. I don't know how the hell I feel about them. It's going to take me a lifetime to work that out.
And the thing is, we do arrive. Even when we do arrive, we have to accept the fact that then because no one ever arrives and stays there. You touch it.
Mm-hmm. And then you go back.
You're like, oh yeah, God's with me. I feel it. I'm one with the universe. I feel forgiveness to all beings. It's like this great mountaintop experience. And then you're like, and back to feeling like, wow, why did I give that up? Yeah. Or what the hell? I remember what they did and that sucked. Yeah. Right?
Or there's like, but wait a minute, I forgot about that thing. I'm like, hold on. Like they apologized, but they didn't mention that. Right. And it's like the cycle starts all over. Yeah.
Yes, it's always cyclical.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. There's an art, there's a process. And so this myth or this idea that we forgive, that always it's as if it's a one-time experience and then we let it go. And I hear people constantly tell me that. They come into therapy and they'll say, what you had a question about my mother or my father? I don't need to talk about them. I've forgiven them. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, okay. They're like, I came here to talk about this particular thing. I'm like, well, that's fine. We'll talk about that when we go there. But I'm like, if you think it's a one-time phenomena, you're wrong. And so now I know that there's stuff there. I probably wouldn't think there was a bunch of stuff there if you had said, yeah, it's a process. I'm in it. Yep. But the fact that you said, no, I've forgiven them. I moved on. I'm like, oh, red flag, write that down.
Well, just as you said that, because I thought, because I can see myself a lot in that too, right? So I was just thinking, that's when we haven't fully accepted our own humanity, right? Which is like, you can't get to that godlike place of grace and forgiveness. It's just, we're human, and it can be working towards it, but I don't think we get there. And I think that I have had a hard time grieving my own humanity, that I'm not going to be able to get over everything. Some things I really want to be able to forgive and move forward, but I come up against this part of me that is like, sweet Sammy, this ain't going back together. And I know you want it to, but it ain't going back together. Like, these parts of me are broken, and I have to grieve my own limitation, my own humanity, that I may get to a spot of reconciliation. I may get to a spot of like total grace and acceptance, but dealing with what is the truth of my own feelings, the truth of where I really am, the truth of where other people really are in their limitations, that truthy place feels like the humanity spot. And that for me is always a process, because I will vacillate like, oh, no, I got this. And I get all omnipotent all over again, or, oh, no, it's great. And getting back to the truth, settling in the truth and I don't know. Just.
No, I love that. And it's abstract. And I was trying to think of how we personalize it, because I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, okay, how much do I want to share vulnerably? And I thought, okay, well, we've been going for about 40 minutes. Maybe we could wrap this up. And I thought, I'll share just a little bit that might make that a real thing vulnerably, which is, I had mentioned to you guys, I went out to dinner with my father, last night, and just a little history of who my father is. He's this general surgeon who I worshipped my whole life, who was in my mind, the perfect Christian, the perfect doctor. And if you ever had a problem with him, well, that was you shouldn't, because he was saving lives. So, he's doing God's work. And so I just wanted his approval and him to be involved in my life. And slowly, only after, I got older, realized he wasn't God, and that he had emotionally abandoned me and left me with a stepmother who was abusive, and he didn't protect me, and that he wasn't a good man a lot, but that was something I could know, but I didn't feel. I only felt that he was good and somehow still I was bad. And I can remember in high school getting to a really down point about how bad I was. Cause I'd always been kind of following all the rules till my senior year in high school. And then senior year in high school, my last semester, I decided to, I guess, because this wasn't a conscious decision, but unconsciously to stop being a good Christian and to really go punk rock and do drugs and not care. And it wasn't working out still. And my father didn't show up and my mother didn't show up. And then I ended up overdosing and I was in the hospital. And where my father worked as a doctor. But he was gone for the weekend. So they pumped my stomach at 17 years old and he wasn't there. And then I went home and they let me out though, because I know everything to say that was all a mistake. And the pet teen asked me all those things. I went home and then I got a call from my dad, but I really in my mind believed he was going to say, I think I told you this story once, Sam, that he was going to say, Brenda, oh no, I've missed you. Like everything's gone wrong. You tried to commit suicide and let me make this all right. And instead he said, oh my God, how could you do that? I was away. He was so embarrassed. And he said, next time you try to do something like that, you call me directly and I will get there and I can pump your stomach at home. So no one would know about it. And I remember just like, right? Yeah. And so this is a lot to share, but nonetheless, I think I put it in my dissertation as a countertransference issue, so I've come to terms with it. But nevertheless,
I think it's really powerful, and I probably, on behalf of me and probably 1,000,000% of who is listening, thank you for being so real.
Thank you. But point of all that is I remember thinking, not, oh, how bad he is, but, oh, this is familiar. And I get it. And he doesn't care. And I'm going to have to figure, like, on some level, he doesn't care, like, about if I do well with my life. Like, I'm going to have to figure out how to do that on my own. Yeah. But also, that was bad. Like, to try to commit suicide. That was bad, quote unquote. Like, and almost like be like the good forgiveness girl again, or somehow, and it got me actually on a good path again, which is kind of funny. But, it's taken me now. So I'm 42, a lot of years of just doing therapy, working on it and trying to forgive him. And then last night, and he's never owned any of it, ever. He's only reminded me of what I've done to him. And then last night, after me doing years and years of grieving who that man was, grieving that he's human, that I'm still going to see him now and then, and that he's emotionally disabled, and I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because I'm only highlighting the worst things. That he also gave me a bunch of things that I love about my father. That I'm actually a very intelligent, capable of a person because of how he pushed me, and that in many ways he helped me find God. And yet he also broke my heart in ways that I'll never be able to comprehend or even share. Ever. And yet I go to dinner with him and now I'm like, gosh, so I've been just grieving him for 20 some years and saying, I'm going to just still keep showing up. And then last night he said to me, thanks for still loving me. I know I wasn't a good father. And, it was like, that's all I ever needed you to do. Like, if you could have done this, like, 20, 30 years ago, like, we could have been like, okay, like, I will give, like, everything for just this bit. And, I told him, I'm like, what a gift that you gave that to me. And he said, I know that's a gift. And that was it. And now today I'm just here talking about forgiveness with you. And all I can say that what I learned about it is there's so much more to forgiveness though than just grieving. Because I could keep doing that for the next 10 years, and he's 85, so I don't know how much longer he'll be around, but I could keep going to dinner with him and still feel like I did my part and I've forgiven, and I was feeling more free, but I feel so much more free now that he took some responsibility.
Yeah.
So I think there's something, and the reason I share all this long, big, vulnerable story is there's something about forgiveness that is more, and I wanted to personalize it, than just us grieving and saying we forgive the offender. And I know people do that when someone has offended them and they're in prison and they say, but I let them go. They're free now or whatever that is. But if someone's willing, and that's for people maybe who are listening to this who need to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. If you take 1 ounce of responsibility, you give such a gift to the other. And there is something in that transaction that is different than just the other person saying, I let them be human, I cried, I forgive it. When the other person takes something and holds it, you feel different. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
So what is that about then? Because we always say I've heard this so many times, especially as a psychotherapist. Forgiveness is just one-sided. They can, it doesn't matter. The rapist can be in jail. The person can be over there. You never have to see them again. Just grieve. You free them. But there is a difference when they say, I did do wrong.
Yeah, I think there's like a transformation that's possible. And I think I don't know, this is just off the cuff, but like maybe what we're talking about is when you don't get that.
Yeah.
How do you
usually don't get it.
You usually don't get it, right? So when you don't get that, how do you feel some kind of power to do something? I
expected to never get that.
Yeah.
So that was a surprise.
Yeah.
Last night, I was like, this gets to be this. I get this, it was, and then I'm like, well, shoot. Yeah. I mean, that's what I always wanted. Mm-hmm. But I had to do it all before that. But I think in so many other ways. So what is it if we're never going to get it? Because usually we won't get it. I mean, there's all these other relationships. I'm never going to get them to say, yeah, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's part of the process. I'm just thinking out loud because this is just coming up and I haven't really thought much about it before today, talking with you in this two-sided part. But part of authentic forgiveness allows us to receive that other part. Whereas if we're not forgiving authentically, would you have been available to receive that from your father even all these years later? Because you mentioned earlier,
so
Sam,
good.
Right. There's this and you forgive this, but you didn't mention that. And he didn't need to say many words because authentically you had gone through your process and forgiven him. And so when he was at that point, it allowed it to be a two-way thing.
You're so, oh my gosh. I think you're so right.
Yeah.
Like that hadn't dawned on me. So, wow.
And it goes in recovery principles too, right? We're powerless over people, places, and things. So the only thing we can control is our effort and our intentions, right? So we do our part. And then if it never happens, we've found some way to be at peace with ourselves. And if it happens, then that's the miracle.
But also, I wonder if 15 years ago, if he had said that, I would have been like, damn straight.
Right. Yeah.
You were a bad father. That's right. There wouldn't have been this. And I've let that go. Created. Like this space created. I hadn't had that.
You let go of the superiority too with the I've forgiven you.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Totally.
There was no room. No room. And so I think that's why that's so part of authentic forgiveness is because
it's not superiority. You got it.
And it just leaves the other person not feeling persecuted anymore, not feeling not feeling that anger we're holding, because whether they're in our life or not, it's felt. It's felt. And so when we let all of that go and experience authentic forgiveness, it leaves room for the person who's hurt us to come to a place of acknowledging what they've done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what you said. I think that's so true. And then if I can just be really honest, where my mind keeps going is like, oh, awesome. So that's what I'll do. And then everyone will do it. And I was like, oh, it's a freaking like omnipotent fantasy again that I could create a safe enough space. But then I know in every interaction, I'll be having that expectation of like, okay, it's super safe now. Go.
Right.
Just want to hold the moment in case you have anything you want to say. No?
Right. But it's still, that is from a space of superiority.
It is.
You're totally right. You're
absolutely.
right. It has taken me so many years to say I'm not going to Yeah. And he must have felt it. I'm really just, I gave that up. I think so. And I told I was on the phone with my mom on the way here to this podcast.
Yeah.
And she goes, how did it go with your dinner last night? She just flew in from Florida. I was talking to her about the storm. And then I said, I told her a little bit about it. And I said, I feel like the Holy Spirit was there. Something was moving different. Like there's something there. And now that I say that, I think there was a freed upness that I was like, I really feel at this point, if I'm going to see him, you are who you are. You're whatever you're going to be. Like there was zero expectation. There's no, it's done. You did the best you could as a human. You're just a human. And I'm going to decide to love those things that were good. And that is where I'm at now. And that took me so freaking long to get. And it really is like just a free place. So I really did. I mean, now I think of your recovery example. I really did, clean up, they say, my side of the street. My side of the street, yeah.
Which I think leaves no room for defensiveness anymore, because that is what it takes, is that defensiveness to come down for them to acknowledge and accept the ways they've hurt somebody. I'm just thinking from the other side.
Yeah.
And so if there's nothing coming against their defensiveness wall, it doesn't need to be up.
And that's why that's the first time I've heard him ever say, too, thank you for loving me still.
Yeah. And as you said, I don't know, maybe this will speak to somebody other than me, but as you said, like that freed him up. And I was like, but did that free him up? Because my father died.
Yeah.
Never owning anything.
Yeah.
And I think I worked the best program I could have ever worked.
And I expected the same thing to happen. That was what I was expecting him to die in a year now. I mean, he's 85, and I thought, this is what's gonna happen. Yeah. And so, yeah.
But I couldn't have dinner with a man like my father.
No.
He was too violent. He was too disturbed. He was too abusive. I couldn't have even had dinner. So I think as I hear you say that, what I'm struck with is, oh man, I couldn't even forgive enough.
No.
To create a space to get that.
But thank you for sharing that.
I know
because that's the
real.
Place. Yes.
But that's why I said maybe I'll share this for someone else, that I think sometimes you can do everything you could do. Your side of the street can be immaculate and you still don't get it. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a spot of truth. You still don't get the other person to own it and take responsibility. Right. And I think that there is, I don't know. I think it's important to hold space for that, because otherwise I, and probably other people too, swing back into like, oh,
I can earn it.
What did I not do right? I can create it. I can control it. And I don't know why some of us get it and some of us don't.
Mm-hmm. No, it was pure luck.
Yeah.
I mean, roulette table, sometimes some people hit the jackpot. Most of us don't.
Yeah.
In that moment, even though it's not, I feel like I didn't, honestly, it's so funny though, because I have spent so many years just in such envy of people with like these great father-daughter relationships. And they're like, oh, my dad. And I'm like, oh, like, so then me to say that I have the roulette, like jackpot, like that's a crack up to me in some ways. But he said for one moment I wasn't a good father. And I'm like, but I got that. But, but for then us who haven't had that, that was amazing that he'll give that. And it took him at 85 years old, forced retirement, to reflect a little. And that was his gift. It was a gift. I told him it was a gift. It was nothing I did. But what's interesting is that we would love to take credit for getting people to take a little ownership.
Yeah. I don't know if we have, I don't think we're that powerful.
We're not.
Right. That's my work, is constantly remembering I have no power over that.
But how good it feels if they do take ownership.
Oh gosh. Sure. Everything.
Yeah.
Oh, it's everything. It's motivation to keep going.
But the thing is, I think the only way, we have to always assume they're not going to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's the only way to stay sane, but I don't know if that's... Yeah, because otherwise I think you end up with an expectation, which leads to resentment and more grief.
Absolutely.
And, accepting what is, as it is. You don't have to like it, I just have to accept it.
So, this may be too, you may want to say, slow down there, Brenda. Why are you asking? But for some reason, I just feel like you told this whole story about Amanda. I'm looking at Amanda for the listeners. You told this whole story about growing up in this really religious home, legalistic. And then you said then you kind of went edgy, and I didn't really get to hear like where you are now or how both of those pieces have been integrated. I just feel like you kind of left those two sides out. And if you're willing, I'd just love to hear how you came to some more integration, or what does forgiveness mean to you? Because I think we've both gotten real personal on it, and I'd love you to just go there with us. I invite you to at least.
Yeah, I'd love to share. I feel like I'm in the thick of it right now. It's an ongoing journey still for me to kind of find the balance of what forgiveness is. I haven't spoken to my dad in about 3 years now. Just from him not respecting me, talking down to me. He just overall has not been a good father. And so it came to a point about 3 years ago where I decided to not have a relationship with him. And so I've been really exploring, which is why I love this topic, really exploring what forgiveness is for me now, as I have kind of removed him from my life for the time being. I don't know if he'll be back in it. I don't know. I struggle, and I've been struggling lately with if I've actually forgiven him while he's cut out of my life, because I'm hitting up against that childhood information of, well, no, he needs to still be in your life and you need to forgive him that way. So it's still an ongoing journey for me, and I don't quite have an answer. I'm still working on it and figuring it out. It's taken a very long time. And my dad is the first person that I have kind of stepped away from, not in anger, definitely in hurt, which is new, because I went to the other end of the spectrum where it was anger, where people would be removed from my life. So it's been different in that. And I'm still figuring out if what I'm doing is acceptable, I guess.
If you're allowed to make that boundary.
Right. Because I still, from my mom, be the bigger person.
Yes.
I've parented my father my whole life, and I'm supposed to continue doing it.
Yes.
And so I find myself still to this day going back to that angry side of, hell no. He has been a child long enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. But at the same time, my heart wants to forgive, and it's still sorting out what that is.
Huh. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that, as we talk about this so much is, and that reminds me of Sam's conversation with her kids.
Yeah.
And they say, the reason that you want us to forgive is that you don't want to tolerate the anger. Right? I mean, that's pretty much
right.
And I think that is true for all of us. We don't want to tolerate the anger, the pain, the negative emotions, the realness that's there. And so what we're saying when we say, what the hell is forgiveness? We're saying it's tolerating so many intolerable emotions.
Absolutely.
And grieving that this person that we love usually isn't what we want them to be, cannot show up in the way we want them to be, didn't. And I think so often it's didn't, and we can't get back what we already lost, but also may never be able to. And often when they're older, usually won't. And, by the way, just throwing out, I fully know that my father is not a changed human being because he said I wasn't a good dad. And there's going to be some kind of, unicorn and rainbow happiness after this. It's it's just an acknowledgement that what I lost was real. That's the difference. And still there's grief there, right?
Yeah.
It's not like there was repair. I mean, there's some repair, but nothing's really going to change.
Yeah.
And I know that. And so it's so much of just saying we're going to tolerate all this unpleasant emotion and all this quote unquote intolerable emotion. And I think that as humans, especially in our culture, just the Western culture, we do such a horrible job of saying, let's just tolerate this intolerable and find out that's the way.
Yeah. I think the Buddhists do a good job when they talk about befriending it. They talk about befriending your suffering. We like to bypass our suffering. We like to fix it and clean it up, but really like truly befriending it. Sitting with, like Pema Chodron calls it, the hot loneliness. Yeah. Sitting with the hot loneliness, sitting with the truth of your suffering for just 1 second longer. Just to sit with it and to be with it and to befriend it, to trust that it will transform. I was trying to find a quote on my phone. I think my therapist gave it to me. I don't know. I think it's a Carl Jung quote or something, but something about like to be on the path is to have arrived at the goal. And I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. So it might be the botched quote and I might be forgetting who it's by, but I think that's something that just came to my mind as we were talking, like to be on the path of forgiveness. But then I was also trying to think of another way to put forgiveness, like to be on the path of my truth, of really befriending my suffering, of really acknowledging what I went through and how it's affected me, and the truth that we are all just humans, and that hurt people. And so to be on that path is to have arrived at the goal. So it is just a moment, but it's a way of living, I guess, rather than an arrival. It's a moment of like, oh, I did it. Oh, I'm off the path. Oh, I'm back on the path.
No, it's so good. Yeah. And as I think we're coming to an end here, I'm just thinking, that's what I would hope the listeners would take away is, we keep talking about in each of these podcasts, authenticity and vulnerability. And it's don't do inauthentic forgiveness. Yeah. Don't do denial in the name of forgiveness. I know it's so easy and we get it. It's what we're saying. We forgive you and we forgive ourselves for following religious platitudes because it's hard to tolerate intolerable feelings. That doesn't make you bad. And no one's saying that we're all guilty. But, when you strive for authentic forgiveness, when you strive for being with people and saying you matter, but also asking them to matter, and then also saying, but there's grief here, and we're both human, and can we forgive each other for being human? That's what I think forgiveness is. That's what the hell it is. And it's one of the most difficult places to sit with another human being. And it's one of the most profound things we ask of each other. So don't take it lightly when you talk about such a sacred word. And it does get confusing because there's a sacredness to it, and let's not make it profane.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said.
All right. Well, thanks, ladies, for talking about this difficult subject. I'm going to have an emotional hangover. I don't know about you.
I feel yeah.
All right.
Thank you for choosing to listen to the Don't Go There podcast. If you enjoyed our podcast, please review us on iTunes. To learn more about any of us, go to www.don'tgotherepodcast.com or www.gazellepsychotherapy.com. Thanks again.